Hi, today on this deep dive, we're doing something a little bit different. Whether you're a seasoned Warhammer lore veteran or are just getting started, you've probably encountered some misconceptions or misinterpreted bits of lore that might have had you scratching your head once you look them up. Well, today you're in luck, since in this video, we're going to dive into my top 10 Warhammer misconceptions, where I will endeavor to clear things up for you and set things straight. Number one, and it's a pretty big one since it downplays the Guard incredibly, is that they only live for 15 hours. In part, this stems from the over-exaggeration and taking real information from certain bits of lore out of context. The origin of this is the book 15 Hours, where the statistic comes from a particular war zone that was extremely dangerous, where the life expectancy of new recruits in this particular war zone at this particular time was just a very short 15 hours. And while there may be some battlefields where the life expectancy is either shorter or longer, this statistic is not representative for all the battlefields or even most of the battlefields in the Imperium. The source of this was 15 Hours by Mitchell Scallon, and it describes the harrowing experience of a new recruit in one of the deadliest war zones that the Imperium has had. As a comparison, it would be like taking the numbers from the Battle of the Bulge and applying that to a grand scale for all the losses of life in every battle. In World War II, the reality of it all is that Guardsmen often have very wide-ranging lifespans and are actually incredibly well trained and well equipped. Comparatively though, they might not seem it, but the average lifespan being 15 hours apparently contradicts a lot of lore where there are many veteran guardsmen which are referenced in books as having served in multiple war zones on multiple occasions in areas where either Astartes had to be called due to emergencies or planets were completely lost. The Astra Militarum in lore is, in fact, an organization that invests greatly in training and preparing its soldiers, which also should be noted that helps improve their chances for survival. And while casualty rates are indeed high, especially in some of the more dangerous conflicts, the majority of the Guardsmen are well equipped to deal with these threats. Now, it's undeniable that some war zones, in particular those infested with Tyranids or suffering from major chaos incursions, would have significantly shorter lifespans. But these are often highlighted in lore to emphasize the grim, dark nature of 40k. And one of the things that is also often noted is long-term campaigns and Guardsmen who have to serve for extended periods of time, which directly implies that these Guardsmen are surviving for multiple protracted battles on multiple worlds. These stories, while less sensational, are an equal part of the lore. The passage in particular, which has caused such a widespread misconception, comes from 15 Hours, page 130, where the statement goes as follows. It is a matter of life expectancy. New fish, the scholar sighed. 15 hours is the average length of time a replacement guardsman survives in Bururok after he has been posted to a combat unit in the front lines. And this has also, due to how sensational and how much traction it has gotten, been quoted in other books as a lifespan for particular war zones. And while yes, some guardsmen will die almost automatically from being thrown into a Ripper swarm, some of the guardsmen that are followed or referenced in books and in codices have them surviving battles that last for days, if not years, where their opponents may be unions attempting to overthrow them, or even some local rebel faction attempting to once again take over. Realistically, this one bit of lore feels like it's incredibly harmful to the Imperial Guard, since honestly they're one of the cooler factions and they're actually incredibly effective and efficient in lore. Another rather large misconception, and one that does a lot of discredit to the faction that it deals with, is the misconception that the Orcs' technology works purely or primarily because of their belief. This in part at least originated from one of the earlier codices, in particular a statement where an Imperial scientist was trying to dissect Orc technology, which was quickly followed by 2 other stories where Imperial officers were trying to say that orcs were smarter than the Imperium propaganda made them out to be, and they were executed for heresy. The individual dissecting and taking apart the orc technology in an attempt to better understand it couldn't figure out how it worked, so he concluded that therefore it must be magic or some psychic ability that allows it to operate, just because the orcs believe it, which led the Imperium to accept his conclusion, because it made the orcs look worse and the Imperium liked that their propaganda was being reinforced. However, being taken as literal truth outside of the context of the story has led this myth to become a large misconception. Orc technology definitely is rather ramshackle, very basic, and not as uniform as ours, or any that we have really experienced, so it has a low probability of functioning, and the orcs do indeed have the probability increased by their Waaagh field. But orc technology is definitely functional, and orcs are biologically natural engineers and tinkerers, creating rather effective, if not crude looking machinery and weapons from scrap and salvaged parts. However, the unique aspect of orc technology is the psychic gestalt field known as the Waaagh field, which increases the probability of their technology working seamlessly. It's basically a psychic field which becomes more and more effective the larger amount of orcs there are, which not only increases the probability of the technology functioning, but its effectiveness, because on a fundamental level, orc technology works. That is irrefutable. For example, orc guns will fire bullets, and orc vehicles are designed to move. And these devices are built on sound, basic engineering principles, albeit in very crude and haphazard ways. In essence, the Waaagh field coalesces with this by acting somewhat as a lubricant, making orc technology significantly more reliable than it would be otherwise. For instance, an orc vehicle might run more smoothly and be more durable when surrounded by a large number of orcs. And while the idea that orc technology works purely on belief is an exaggeration, their collective belief will play a role in how well this technology works and how haphazard the construction can be. The Waaagh field makes improbable things happen. Ramshackle vehicles holding together, or seemingly nonsensical weapons firing accurately. Orc weapons such as shootas, blunt choppas, along with orc vehicles such as trucks and battle wagons are often made out of various parts of scrap, and while they do not look like they should work, functionally they follow the basic rules of reality that is in the rest of the Warhammer universe. And it really does do a disservice to the orcs, makes them incredibly funny. Basically, orc technology is fundamentally functional, and the Waaagh field significantly increases the chances of something that would work 20% of the time into working 70 to 80% of the time. The third misconception, and one that is actually closer to the truth, is that the Adeptus Mechanicus does not innovate or create new things. And while yes, they have an insane and factually religious reverence for ancient technology, the Adeptus Mechanicus, in particular the tech priests of Mars, view technological relics of the past, especially those from the dark age of technology, as sacred and often truly perfect. And while they do not one-to-one innovate the same way we do, where in around 20 to 50 years technology has completely changed in almost every facet, the Adeptus Mechanicus does engage in research and development. Their approach to innovation is actually heavily influenced by their religious beliefs and the fear of technological heresy. Now, how do they innovate, one might ask? One of the ways is with the recovery of lost technology, as it is the primary way that the Adeptus Mechanicus innovates, as they scour the galaxy for ancient standard template constructs, which are blueprints for advanced technologies from humanity's golden age. These rediscoveries are often incomplete but seen as divine revelations, and are quickly integrated into the technological arsenal of humanity. However, due to many of them being incomplete or damaged due to the time span that has gone on since their creation, often a lot of these STCs will be more like inspiration or guidance, as they attempt to recreate the effects and the machinery that they see, despite it being incomplete. Much like a lot of the reverse engineering that is often used from captured technologies during war times. For example, one of these advancements was an enhancement to the efficiency of the plasma reactor based on something they saw on a completely separate STC, or improving the targeting systems on a lasgun with information they saw for the targeting systems of a tank or a spaceship. There's also quite a bit of experimental research, as some factions within the Mechanicum, such as those who align with Archmagos Belisarius Call, are more open to experimental and innovative research. Call in particular has been rather well known to push the boundaries of what is considered acceptable, which has led to significant advancements like the creation of the Primaris Marines and a lot of the technology the Primaris Marines use, only having the slightest conceptual link to something that was pre-existing. However, much of this is often kept within particular Forge worlds, due to the fear that the more staunch believers in the Mechanicum's religion on Mars would lash out against this heretical application of science and technology. There's also an incredible amount of reverse engineering going on from Xenos tech, and while it is rather controversial and often done in secrets, it has led to significant technological advances, such as the studying of Necron technology and Eldar weaponry being used to create things such as the Xenophase blades of the Death Watch, and even the weaponry used by the Adeptus Assassinorum. And while Forge worlds like Mars and Ryza are centers of technological development, it is not in the same manner that we do, as their reverence for technology and fear of heresy, in particular of AI, has created a rather secure safeguard for experimental technology that could actually be a detriment by slowing down their process of advancement significantly. However, due to how many Forge worlds and how much undiscovered technology is constantly found, even though it is slowed when there are leaps in progress, they quickly accumulate and are rather advantageous. And all of this is indeed done within the framework of their beliefs. In essence, the Mechanicum, while rather cautious and paranoid, do engage in quite a bit of research and development, not only through rediscovery, but through incremental improvements and experimental research, along with reverse engineering, all done in a manner which safeguards anything like the Men of Iron occurring again. The fourth misconception is less of a misconception and more of a meme that has essentially seeped into almost every aspect of Warhammer. This in particular is the I am Alfarius meme. And while it's not exactly a misconception, the way it's used seems to go against its original intent. The Alpha Legion is rather unique amongst the Space Marine legions, in particular because it had two primarchs, the twins Alfarius and Omegon, who in more recent lore, one of them have been the first primarch discovered, or at least so their book says. But like anything with the Legion, there is a large amount of misdirect and mystery added into it. The Alpha Legion in particular had always specialized in espionage, deception, and infiltration. As part of their tactics, the Alpha Legionnaires often claim to be Alfarius in order to confuse their enemies and maintain an air of secrecy to their operations. In lore, when asked who they are, many, but not all, Alpha Legionaries will respond with, "I am Alfarius," making it nearly impossible to determine who the real Alfarius was. This tactic seems to be a direct reference to the I am Spartacus scene from the movie Spartacus, where multiple characters claim to be Spartacus in order to protect the real one. The inspiration for the joke itself comes from the fans often claiming that anyone could be Alfarius, playing into the idea that the identity of Alfarius is always in question, and the identity of any character could be in question as well. And while this might lead to some, as unlikely as it is, believing that every Alpha Legionnaire at this time could be Alfarius, or that the Primarch can be in multiple places at once, or even still alive, in reality, at this point in the lore, it's more of a strategic ploy used by the Alpha Legion to maintain anonymity, rather than anyone actually claiming that they are Alfarius. It functions as a way to sow confusion against their potential rivals. In the novel Legion by Dan Abnett, this tactic is prominently featured, as the Alpha Legionnaire's ability to blend in and claim to be Alfarius is a key strategy in their tactics. However, it is almost sussed out by everyone that when someone claims to be Alpharius, they are not actually Alpharius. All they're doing is hiding their identity behind the name of Alpharius, especially since at this point it's beyond a reasonable doubt that both Alpharius and Omegon have long since been dead. Now, this is also often represented in-game and in media, as this meme is referenced rather often to show how mysterious and cunning the Alpha Legion can be, even to the point that multiple videos have the only thing that distincts an Alpha Legionnaire from another is a French accented laugh. And while it is a fun part of the community and its culture, it can be confusing to some. But this is actually rather positive since it does highlight the Alpha Legion's rather mysterious nature and how deceptive the Legion is as a whole. However, unlike the previous misconceptions, this, meme has become a symbol of the Alpha Legions, which has allowed many people to continue to hold interest and find further entertainment with the Alpha Legion. Now the next misconception, or maybe misinterpretation would be more apt, is the reality of Plague Marines and their existences, in particular regarding Nurgle's gifts. Now this in part may be because at one point, Fantasy and 40k had essentially interchangeable Chaos Gods, with little to no different, and how happy some of Nurgle's followers can seem by comparison. But while Plague Marines are warriors who have dedicated themselves to the Chaos God Nurgle, the Lord of Decay, and while yes, Nurgle does bestow various gifts upon them, these are often in the form of very painful diseases, mutations, and their quintessential grotesque resilience to pain and suffering. And while these gifts may make them formidable in battle, they do come at a great and terrible personal cost, as both their physical state and their mental state is constantly in undulating waves of decay and corruption. As their bodies are bloated and rotting, all the while being filled with pestilence, they are unable to feel the pain of what is done to them, in part due to the overwhelming pain they would already be in, and the fact that they are slowly decaying and decomposing. This physical corruption is mirrored by the deep psychological toll that many Plague Marines have and have expressed in the lore. In particular, there are quite a number of Plague Marines who have voiced a deep sense of self-loathing and despair due to their situation. The misconception that Plague Marines are happy-go-lucky chaps is rather a misconception of their sad and miserable existences, as their horrific nature beguiles their existence. They have accepted what has happened to them out of necessity rather than out of true joy, as many Plague Marines have reached a state of apathy with their lot in life and attempt to mask it with the joyous singings and praises of Grandfather Nurgle, not because they are truly happy, but because they have been worn down by their circumstances, as the relentless nature of their existence and the overwhelming power of the Chaos God leaves them with little to no choice but to accept their miserable condition. Even those who are more religious, such as the Plague Marine known as Vorax, have stated that they are generally fed up with their situation, and their devotion to their Chaos God is more often centered in resignation and the need for survival rather than genuine happiness or contentment. Some examples in the lore are the already mentioned Vorax, who, while being deeply religious and worshipping Nurgle as much as possible, still struggles with their condition, as faith in Nurgle is often a coping mechanism rather than a source of true joy. In essence, they are in a state similar to the zombies from Return of the Living Dead, who only seem emotional and truly pleased with themselves, not out of actual joy, but because their actions help ease the pain of their miserable, unending existences. Basically, they just exist to suffer, and they hope that by worshipping Nurgle and pretending to be happy, they'll have some modicum of solace in their horrible, decrepit, and rotting existences to ease the pain of being dead. The sixth misconception is one that's become a meme. However, this one really does reduce the group that it is about. And once again, it is in regards to the Imperial Guard, or rather, one of the more well-known units within the Imperial Guard, the Death Corps of Krieg, and the idea that they are mindless soldiers who seek to end themselves in glorious battle. And while the Death Corps of Krieg are known for their willingness to sacrifice themselves, they are far from mindless. They are a highly disciplined and highly trained group of soldiers who excel in trench warfare and protracted sieges. Now, Krieg was once a rather prosperous hive world, which eventually fell into rebellion against the Imperium, or at least large swaths of it. In response, the loyalist forces within the planet, led by Colonel Yurton, unleashed a devastating atomic bombardment upon their own planet in order to purge all heretical rebels. This act of extreme loyalty and sacrifice is both emblematic to Kriegers and turned their planet into a radioactive wasteland, leading to one of their primary beliefs, which has been misconstrued and once again through a game of telephone and multiple retellings, led to the idea that the Kriegers are just looking to mindlessly charge to their own deaths. This is their belief in atonement through service. The survivors of Krieg, who had gone from a rather habitable, healthy world to living in underground hive cities, formed the Death Corps of Krieg, as their primary goal was to atone for their planet's rebellion by serving the Imperium with unwavering loyalty and a willingness to endure the harshest conditions in a manner that honestly mirrors that of the Great Crusade's own Iron Warriors. There's also the misconception that Kriegers are emotionless, as they are indeed rather stoic in nature, but their stoicism comes more from their styling and from their harsh upbringing, which is needed to survive their toxic wasteland of a planet. It is also hard for them to display much emotion when they're almost exclusively depicted as wearing gas masks at all times, something that would be necessary in a highly toxic environment such as their homeworld. And while the Death Corps of Krieg are willing to tough it out even in the most difficult of situations, they are a highly disciplined and skilled group, driven by a sense of duty and atonement. Not the happy shovel gas mask meme guys, which seems to have been rather overstated, which is a hyper-simplification of one of the most well-respected and well-delved into segments of the Imperial Guard. The seventh misconception, and one that hits kinda close to home since they are one of my armies, is the misconception that the World Eaters are mindless brutes who just charge forward mindlessly. And while the World Eaters are known for their brutal and relentless combat style, they are far from mindless. In reality, they're highly skilled warriors who follow a brutal code of martial prowess and, at times, even honor, in large part due to their devotion to Khorne. The origins of this general misconception is their primarch and the butcher's nails, which, while yes, they do change how they operate, it's not a complete and total overhaul of the World Eater. The World Eaters were originally led by their primarch, Angron, who he himself was implanted with the butcher's nails, which are a form of neural implant which heighten aggression and bloodlust. This technology was later adapted in a more stable form for the Legion itself, which amplified their ferocity greatly, but also caused immense pain and psychological torment. Their devotion to Khorne is also largely responsible for them seeking out to engage in the most brutal combat possible. Their worship of Khorne is not just about mindless slaughter, but it is also about proving their martial prowess and earning the favor of their god. And they can't do that if they're dead because they charged head first into a gun line. The misconception is that the World Eaters lack strategy and are all just mindless berserkers. But despite their reputation for their berserker rage, the World Eaters have been shown on multiple occasions to be able to use strategic thinking and tactical planning. However, their approach to warfare is intentionally direct and brutal, but it is also effective and often meticulously planned. This meticulous nature goes so far as to have a World Eater and the Thousand Suns Sorcerer have a rather short discussion about the roles of their legions and how they both interact with each other. Now, despite their reputation, there are many examples of World Eaters using tact and being able to lead efficiently. One of the most, if not the single most well-known of these, is Kharn the Betrayer, arguably the single most famous World Eater aside from their Primarch, who exemplifies the Legion's brutal efficiency. While he is known for his berserk rage, he has also been shown on multiple occasions to be a highly skilled and cunning warrior who can turn the tide of battle through the use of both ferocity and his tactical acumen. In the current timeline, the World Eaters operate in numerous warbands, each led by a powerful champion. These warbands conduct their raids and campaigns with a level of coordination much greater than that which the World Eaters are typically displayed in, often including long-range assaults and the use of heavy firepower and mechanized warfare. Now, other World Eaters who are rather well known for being highly skilled, disciplined, tactical thinkers are Coalsax the Forsworn. Coalsax the Forsworn is another prominent figure within the World Eaters, and he is known for his cunning and strategic thinking, often leading his warband with a mix of brutality and tactical acumen, which even the Ultramarines would be jealous of. His current role as a leader of his warband has shown him in various conflicts across the galaxy, and, in particular, his ability to plan and execute complex strategies that play into the strengths and weaknesses of the World Eaters sets them apart from the stereotype of a mindless berserker which has become all too well associated with the World Eaters. There are also warbands who actively work to separate themselves from this type of warfare, such as the Skulltakers Warband, whose leaders employ more than just brute force, as they conduct raids, complex siege warfare, and military operations with a great amount of precision and effectiveness. And there is the newest entry into these standout World Eaters, such as Gladiator Cadre 331, which is a warband of the World Eaters who has almost perfectly maintained the ancient disciplines and ways of combat that the World Eaters used to hold, and who have, by this, successfully been able to avoid succumbing to the Butcher's nails, which has caused many an Imperial to be completely surprised by the level of their tactical coherency. Overall, the misconception that the World Eaters are mindless brutes is one that has been greatly exaggerated. And while elements of this misconception are indeed true, the World Eaters are factually not just one-dimensional mindless butchers. On to the 8th misconception, and this one is about the Sisters of Battle, but it is not one caused by any issues in the lore, more of a word usage issue. The misconception comes from the Sisters of Battle taking vows of celibacy, and while the Sisters of Battle have not been explicitly shown or implied to take vows of celibacy, as their primary vow is that of poverty, it seems that this one has come, in part at least, due to their image as nuns with guns. But the issue really comes from the difference between chastity and celibacy. The Sisters of Battle are often described as being chaste, which means they live a life of purity and moral integrity. This does not necessarily equate to celibacy, which is a vow to abstain from marriage and adult relations entirely. Chastity can mean abstaining from adult relations while outside of marriage or maintaining religiously moral conduct. And while there may be some orders in particular who have rules regarding relationships and celibacy, and these would most definitely differ between different orders, much like the practices of different Space Marine chapters differing wildly, including some Space Marine chapters allowing for adult relationships between Space Marines and non-Space Marines take place. Some orders may have stricter interpretations of chastity, while others may have more lenient ones. Part of this image comes from their focus on their duty, as a Sister of Battle is sworn to both the Emperor and his Imperium, and their religious training, along with constant deployments and their dedication to their mission, would factually lead to little time for personal relationships. Such an example would be love or any carnal relationships. However, there are examples of Sisters of Battle having carnal relationships and emotional ones as well. In the novel Kane's Last Stand, there's the implication that a high-ranking sister was involved in a romantic relationship. This suggests that while relationships may be rare, they are not explicitly forbidden. There's even the rather famous The Order's Hospitaller, a non-militant order, such as the aforementioned Order Hospitaller, which are healers, and the Order Famulus, which are diplomats and advisors, have different expectations regarding personal relationships due to their roles, often involving close interactions with others. And while the idea that the Sisters of Battle are completely celibate may not be entirely accurate, and the fact that they do live lives of essential chastity and moral integrity with vows of poverty, obedience, and devotion to the Emperor, the idea that Sisters of Battle have relationships and go on dates is rather funny. And while most Sisters of Battle would usually be too busy fighting, the misconception that they would never engage in said relationships is one that is rather out of place. If the Sisters of Battle do get pregnant, they would be sent back to the convent in order to teach and or assist. And after having the child would naturally be brought in the convent as a part of the ecclesiarchy, be it a sister, a priest, or a diplomat. An example of this is also shown in The Emperor's Finest, where Cain discovers that a sister superior in charge of sisters' novitiate is having an affair with a munitorum representative of their scolum. So factually, not all Sisters of Battle are celibate, and you may do with that what you will. The next misconception may be in part due to multiple author syndrome, where multiple authors have had different and or layered interpretations of the same issue, which is the Imperium sacrificing 1,000 souls per day to the Emperor in a sort of ritualistic sacrifice. Now, the reality is that the Astronomicon is powered by psychic energies of rather powerful psychers who are formed into an astropathic choir. And while it is true that the psychers will eventually die in the process, the situation is a little bit more complex than simply sacrificing 1,000 souls per day. This is in large part due to the Astronomicon and its function, as the Astronomicon is a powerful psychic beacon located on Terra, which is used by the Emperor of Mankind from his golden throne in order to project a navigational beacon to aid all Imperial starships, allowing them to travel through the warp and reach their destinations with relative safety. Now, this is done in large part through the usage of an astropathic choir specifically trained by them. The Astronomicon is maintained by a choir of 1,000 to 10,000 rather powerful psychers who are highly specialized during their trip to Terra to do this one job, as the psychers will channel their psychic energy together, which the Emperor will use and shape into the Astronomicon's beacon. Now, this is not one task that would automatically kill them, but the process of maintaining the Astronomicon is extremely demanding on the psychers, as they will pour out immense amounts of psychic energy, which takes a significant toll upon their bodies, and will inevitably lead to a constant high mortality rate. Due to the intense nature of the task, a significant percentage of the psychers stationed to do this will die daily, and the mortality rate, depending on the source, has ranged at times from 1% to 10%, meaning that while not all of the psychers will die every day, a substantial number do, and they must be replaced regularly on a daily schedule, meaning that they will indeed eventually die on the job. Seeing as this is not just a simplistic sacrificial ritual, but instead that they are actively involved in some way, shape, or form in maintaining the Astronomicons, and their deaths are not a consequence of maintaining the Emperor as a being himself, but for the demands of what the Emperor and they must do together, significantly skews the concept that this is just a sacrifice to the Emperor every day. As they will constantly bring new psychers in, others will die, and the rate must be maintained, meaning that 1,000 souls must be collected for the Emperor, but they're not being sacrificed to the Emperor per se. It is merely the outcome of them maintaining the Astronomicon along with the Emperor, who in some of the novels has been noted to be fractured and damaged due to the process himself. So we can take that damage and multiply it 100 or 1,000-fold to all the psychers who aid him. And while many do die in the process, it is not a straightforward sacrificial ritual, even though its outcome may appear to be such, as the Astronomicon essentially channels the prayers and the emotions of 1,000 psychers constantly, and that is an incredible amount of power. And when a psycher dies, their scream will be sent out into the warp and carry with it the last emotions of the dead psycher, which the Emperor may more easily mold into the energy of the Astronomicon as a beacon. This is to the point that it has gone into some detail that in one of the Night Lord's books that Talos was able to create an evil short-term version of the Astronomican by torturing a colony's entire astropathic guild endlessly for days, eventually killing them all, but not immediately, which would release a beacon of suffering and despair that rippled out to several systems in all directions, which ended up doing a similar function to that of the Astronomicon. The 10th and final misconception is one that has more recently been cleared up constantly in books, but it is still believed by some. This misconception is that the Tyranids actively avoid Necrons because they lack biomass. While it may be true that Necrons themselves do not provide biomass, this does not mean that the Tyranids avoid Necron tomb worlds, as the Tyranids are driven by an insatiable hunger to consume all forms of biomass and strip planets bare, which is something that is oftentimes not as heavily noted in the lore due to a planet having its minerals and metals harvested is not as shocking as having all the lives and living things on it wiped out. And it is also important to note that Necron tomb worlds are not entirely devoid of biomass, since over millions of years, many tomb worlds have developed ecosystems with vegetation and animals, along with other forms of life. And it is also notable that some Necron dynasties do keep organics in order to serve them, or to experiment on, depending on the dynasty. And it must also be taken into account that the Tyranids will often make strategic decisions based on the availability of biomass, not on if there is any biomass. If they have the biomass in order to take a planet and use what the planet has to recoup their losses or gain a significant foothold, be it tactical or otherwise within a system, they will likely take it. And if a Necron tomb world offers significant resources, the Tyranids will most definitely attack. However, if a tomb world is largely artificial or lacks significant biomass, or even a tactical position, the Tyranids may choose to bypass it, but it being bypassed is not guaranteed. And there have been multiple historic engagements which have proven this. There are instances in the lore where the Tyranids have actively gone out of their way to engage Necrons, such as when the Tyranids fought the Novoka dynasty rather than avoiding them. This is an active and currently ongoing conflict, showing that the Tyranids will not just avoid these areas. And while the Salams incident has led many to misinterpret the suggestion that Tyranids just avoid tomb worlds in their totality, the Novakan dynasty's conflicts have been raging for years and actively demonstrate that the Tyranids do not avoid Necron tomb worlds. However, the incident in Somlands is not as straightforward as it seems, as the avoidance of the planet itself was noted during the 5th edition Necron Codex, as Imperial Inquisitors were attempting to find out why the planet was originally avoided by the Tyranids. But later on, in War in the Museum, the readers are informed that the Tyranids were indeed heading straight for Stormlands, and that they were prophesied by Orkan himself to destroy the planet. But it would be Trazyn himself who avoids this prophecy by setting up deep space lures which actively diverted the Tyranids around the planet, leaving it intact. During the Shield of Baal incidents, the Necrons actively worked with the Blood Angels, in large part due to them knowing that some of their tomb worlds would be destroyed well before they would awaken. However, the planet's tomb complex would actively be awoken, yet it was a battle that their numbers alone could not defeat. And the Tyranids, just through their relentless waves of monsters, would eventually overwhelm the Necron defenders. There is also the Charkornak dynasty, which is defined by having its core world demolished by 5 fleet behemoth, who have been so diminished and devastated that it was said that they may have to use the ghost arcs to actively keep up their numbers to any functional degree. There is also the fact that one of the Tyranids codexes notes the overlord of a minor dynasty having chosen mutual annihilation over allowing the Tyranids to overrun his tomb world, which led to the activation of a super weapon, potentially a Catan shard, in order to burn both sides into oblivion. So the misconception that Tyranids completely avoid tomb worlds is one that's somewhat outdated, and or in part done due to misinterpretations of the lore and the multiple writers who have been in charge of writing said lore. I hope that even though this is a departure from my usual style of content, whomever watched it found it to either be informative or entertaining.